The story began with a man named Jed, a poor mountaineer who barely managed to keep his family fed through his daily struggles in the hills. One ordinary day, while he was hunting and shooting at some food, an unexpected event changed his life forever, as up from the ground came a bubbling crude liquid. It was oil, often called black gold or Texas tea. Before anyone knew what was happening, old Jed became a millionaire, transforming his humble existence in an instant. His kinfolk gathered around and told him that he must move away from their old home, suggesting that California was the exact place he ought to be. Excited for the future, they loaded up their truck and moved to Beverly Hills, a land filled with swimming pools and famous movie stars, where they became known to everyone as the Beverly Hillbillies. On a bright morning in their grand new neighborhood, Jed Claberts greeted Megan, who warmly wished him a good morning. Jed looked around and inquired if Granny and Ellie Mae had returned from the hills yet. Megan replied that they had not, but they were expected back any minute, adding that she would be truly glad to see them because keeping a wild animal fed was becoming quite a challenging chore. When Megan clarified that she did not mean Jethro, Jed explained that Ellie had left him in charge of a grizzly cub, which seemed to chase after vegetables just as enthusiastically as Jethro did. With a look of mild curiosity, Jed asked Miss Jane if she had ever tried to burp a bear, to which Miss Jane expressed her complete surprise, admitting that she had never experienced such a thing. Suddenly, the chief walked in, prompting Jed to offer 15 cents if it was a personal call, while Miss Jane kindly suggested that she had some experience handling beasts and would be happy to help. Jed thanked her for the generous offer, but mentioned that Cousin Bessie was already helping with the other small creatures, and Jethro was expected back from the airport with the women at any moment. As Miss Jane tried to offer further assistance, a loud commotion broke out, causing someone to shout to get back and stay away. Miss Jane realized she had to hang up immediately because Captain Bligh was calling for her. The chief entered the office demanding his morning newspaper, but Miss Jane hesitated, believing the news would only upset him. The chief became defensive, shouting that nothing could upset him more than what he had already endured with the Hillbillies. He reminded her of the chaos that ensued when Jethro received his induction notice and Jed decided to buy him an actual tank, forcing the chief to act as part of the tank crew. He vividly recalled being dressed up like Don Hindenburg and getting arrested, asking how morning paper could possibly upset him more than that. Miss Jane tried to calm him down, assuring him that nobody in the bank would hear his complaints. However, upon glancing at the headline, the chief gasped in horror, realizing that if the news got out, he would be completely ruined. He began to sob, prompting Miss Jane to comfort him by saying that old soldiers never cry. The chief lamented how unfair the situation was, especially since Jethro had dressed up like General Patton and nobody had even noticed him. Miss Jane assured him that the ordeal was over, as Jethro had already returned the tank and was currently bringing Granny and Ellie home from the airport. Meanwhile, inside the massive vehicle, Granny shouted at the top of her lungs, telling everyone to hush because her eardrums were bursting. Jethro complained back, declaring that this was the absolute last time he would ever transport females in his tank. When they arrived home, Uncle Jed met them, expressing his surprise that Jethro had not returned the vehicle as promised. Jethro explained that when he witnessed the immense respect a tank general received at the airport, with soldiers, sailors, Marines, and members of the Air Force all saluting him, he simply had to buy it back. Seeing the state they were in, Granny urgently asked Jed to fetch her medical bag. Jed worriedly asked if she was hurt, but Granny clarified that the medicine was for the general, meaning Jethro, as she herself was perfectly fine. Jed reminded Granny that Jethro was joining the army and urged everyone to be gentle with him. Granny, however, was furious about what the boy had put her and Ellie through, noting that there was barely enough room in the vehicle for 4 occupants. Jed was puzzled by the number until Jethro revealed they had brought back a surprise guest named Pearl. They had named the little pig after Jethro's mother, because she was the one who gave it to them. Jethro defended the animal, calling it the quietest female in the entire tank. Jethro then ordered a civilian to watch out and help carry the suitcases upstairs, boasting that they were speaking to a 4-star, 2-gun general who now required a personal aide. Later, The chief expressed his frustration, stating that he thought Jethro had gotten rid of the military vehicle. He insisted that the only way to stop this foolishness was to have Jethro inducted into the army this very day. Miss Jane pointed out that the boy had not even received his physical examination yet, but the chief worried that if they delayed, Jethro might decide to join the Navy and buy a destroyer, or join the Air Force and convince Jed to buy a B-52 bomber. Jed overheard this and asked what they were saying about a B-52, mistakenly thinking they were talking about his upcoming 52nd birthday. Miss Jane smiled and asked what Jed would like for his birthday, to which the chief dryly responded that Jed would simply like to turn 52 in peace. When asked about Ellie Mae, Jed mentioned she was out in the backyard with the pig. The conversation turned back to Jethro, who was still wearing his grand general uniform. The chief insisted that the boy could not enter the service without a proper medical checkup, prompting Granny to grab her medical bag and declare that she would handle the examination herself. She ordered Jethro to step into the room and take his clothes off, but Jethro protested, claiming he was ready for military maneuvers. Granny insisted, while Mr. Drysdale explained that an official army doctor would usually conduct the exam. Granny strongly objected, recalling a family rumor about an army doctor named General Peritonitis who had supposedly caused harm to a relative. Mr. Drysdale tried to explain that General Peritonitis was a medical condition and not an actual doctor, but Granny refused to listen, stating that she would never let stranger hands touch the child who, to the army, was just a number, but to her, was Pearl's precious baby. Jethro pleaded to let the army doctors do it, but Granny comforted him, saying the military men were far too rough, while her own hands were soft and gentle like a healer, even if Jethro jokingly muttered that they felt as rough as an alligator hide. Outside, Miss Jane found Jed polishing the tank and suggested he was wasting his time on the old machine. Jed admitted she might be right, but mentioned that Jethro already wanted him to purchase a brand new, much larger one. Miss Jane earnestly begged Jed not to buy Jethro any more military equipment, assuring him that the army would provide everything, including training, uniforms, and 3 square meals a day to turn him into a real fighting man. Jed chuckled, noting that reducing Jethro's diet to only 3 meals a day would certainly be a major change. Back inside, Granny began her unique medical examination. She checked Jethro's temperature and declared it to be a normal 142 degrees, ignoring the fact that the high reading was simply because the thermometer had just been sterilized in boiling water. She then ordered Jethro to cross his legs so she could check his reflexes. Jethro complained that he had a busted knee, but Granny told him that the army had no room for crybabies and ordered him to sit down. Jethro moaned that they would not even let him enlist if he was crippled, but Granny told him to behave before she gave him another military promotion, playfully adding a stripe to his imaginary rank. She then commanded him to open his mouth wide and say, "Ah, so." She could inspect his throat. Looking inside, she marveled at his teeth, comparing him to a garfish, but noticed a strange coating on his tongue. Jethro admitted it was wax, causing Granny to declare that the boy would truly eat anything. Granny then looked into Jethro's ears and gave a serious look, implying that she found something troubling but decided the patient was better off not knowing. To treat his knee, she reached for a saw to cut some wooden splints, terrifying Jethro, who begged her to let the army handle it. Granny stood her ground, stating that while Uncle Jed paid for everything else, her medical skill was her own special contribution to the cause. After securing the tight splints, she allowed Jethro to put his regular clothes back on. Jed entered and asked how the physical exam went, and Granny proudly announced that Jethro passed, though he had some unusual health habits like eating hot wax and bumping into things. Jethro complained that he could not fit his general uniform over the bulky wooden splints, but Granny ordered him to keep them on, giving him some special herbs to chew on if the pain became too intense. Jed reminded the boy that Mr. Drysdale wanted him to wear normal clothes to the induction center anyway. Jethro sighed, feeling defeated that he was already busted back to a civilian before even starting. Jed noticed that Granny had placed corks in the boy's ears, and Granny explained it was to prevent the cold wind from blowing right through his head, joking that if anyone blew into Jethro's mouth, they could play his head like a musical instrument. At the Army Induction Center, A secretary informed the colonel that the young man Mr. Drysdale spoke about, Jethro Bodine, had arrived. The colonel was delighted to welcome a young man who was genuinely anxious to serve his country, expressing his weariness toward modern draft dodgers who used endless excuses to avoid service. He praised Jethro as a true patriot, a big and husky fellow who looked like he came right out of the hills, comparing him to the legendary Sergeant York. When Jethro walked into the room limping heavily due to the splints and failing to hear the greetings, the colonel assumed the boy was a wounded hero who was still eager to fight. Even when Jethro showed signs of being hard of hearing, the colonel remained deeply impressed by his spirit, comparing him to great historical figures who overcame physical limitations to save their nations. He promptly ordered the sergeant to process the young man. Shortly after, a psychiatrist entered the colonel's office to discuss the new hillbilly hero. The colonel warned the doctor not to try to confuse the boy with psychological theories, insisting that Jethro was prime soldier material. The psychiatrist laughed and claimed that Jethro was actually the greatest draft dodger he had ever encountered. The colonel defended Jethro, stating that the boy was simply hard of hearing, but the psychiatrist revealed that he had just removed 2 large corks from the young man's ears. Furthermore, the doctor explained that the limp was entirely fake because he had removed the crude wooden splints, which had been applied by the boy's grandmother with a hammer just to keep him from leaving home. The psychiatrist explained that the family was incredibly wealthy, possessing over $60 million and living in a massive mansion in Beverly Hills, meaning Jethro's old clothing and strange behavior were all part of a brilliant, elaborate strategy to make the army believe he was completely unfit for service. The colonel was stunned by the theory, wondering what kind of mastermind could conceive such a plan. Just then, Jethro stepped back into the office, politely asking if he could finally join the army, head to the front lines, and commence the fighting. He admitted that he would highly appreciate getting some food first, which Jed clarified was just what the boy called victuals. The psychiatrist viewed this as another sign of Jethro's genius, believing the boy was merely pretending to be a compulsive eater to fail the psychological exams. To test him, the doctor held up various classic inkblot cards. While normal patients might see conventional images, Jethro enthusiastically identified every single abstract shape as delicious foods, describing them as ham hocks, hog jowls, pork chops, and a big fat turkey ham. After the test, Jethro eagerly asked again if he could join, assuring the officers that it would not cost the government a single penny because his Uncle Jed was fully prepared to pay for his entire stay, including room, board, uniforms, weapons, tanks, and airplanes. Fascinated, the colonel expressed a desire to meet this wealthy uncle, and Jethro happily volunteered to fetch his entire family from outside. While Jethro left the room, the psychiatrist predicted that the boy would return with a bizarre group of actors to complete the grand illusion. Moments later, Jethro returned, proudly introducing his family and showing off the large military vehicle parked right outside. He introduced Cousin Bessie, who turned out to be a chimpanzee, along with Ellie Mae, Granny, and Uncle Jed. The colonel asked Jed if he was truly the rich uncle, and Jed modestly replied that he only possessed around $65 million, mentioning that they had recently spent $10 million on a beautiful castle in England complete with a moat, a drawbridge, and knights in armor. The psychiatrist tried to test Jethro's reactions by asking how he felt about Pearl. Jethro honestly replied that Pearl was just a pig who smelled rather bad when all 4 of them were crammed inside the tank together. Seeing the entire eccentric family and hearing about the private tank parked in front of the building, the colonel and the psychiatrist were completely overwhelmed. The doctor concluded that Jethro was an absolute authentic genius of deception, suggesting that he should be placed directly into high-level intelligence work. The colonel agreed, telling Jethro that they would find the perfect special spot for a man with such an extraordinary brain. The family expressed how proud they were of Jethro, noting that he was the very first among them to successfully graduate the 6th grade. After thanking the family and bidding them a warm farewell, the officers watched from the window as the entire group, including the chimpanzee, piled back into the small tank. The colonel watched the vehicle drive away, admiring the young general and expressing his sincere hope that the army could officially draft him before any other government agency discovered his unique talents. With the grand adventure drawing to a gentle close, it was finally time to say goodbye to Jed and all his wonderful kin, who were deeply grateful to everyone for dropping in, extending a warm invitation for everyone to return next week to enjoy another helping of their famous Hillbilly hospitality.